Unlike many of my friends, I don't really have any major nostalgia attached to Arnold Schwarzenegger nor Sylvester Stallone. I mean, while they were kind of watching those huge action films as kids, the stuff I was into was more basically anime, martial arts films, and namely video games. I was more of a gamer nerd than I was a film nerd back then. And don't get me wrong, I can enjoy like the cheesy 80s action films when I'm in the mood for it, and that's what I know I'm getting into. It's when I'm not getting into that, or when I think I'm not getting into that, where it kind of bothers me. That said, let's begin this episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, on paper, the story actually sounds kind of cool. It has kind of equal parts Shawshank Redemption, Prison Break, and The Bourne Identity. But in execution, well, it's not too good in execution. And a lot of it really has to do with the writing. I mean, the first thing is that for most of the film, it tries to play it straight and be serious about its plot, and it actually almost could have been a completely serious film, even with Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger as the actors, because for most of the film, it actually is pretty serious and actually takes itself pretty seriously, and you actually get some pretty good acting moments. But then the third act happens. Boy, I had a lot of problems with that, because the third act is where everything just kind of devolved in your typical 80s action film, and not in the good way. I mean, it had a lot of the cliches and the huge firefight sort of stuff, and it's just like, oh, get it, these people are being badasses, and I'm just like, tonal shift, what? Basically, it was just a complete change in tone, like out of the frickin' blue. On top of that, it also made some of the plot points and details and even some of the mysteries that were given make no sense really whatsoever. I mean, the fact that the Sylvester Stallone's character was initially a prosecutor who started breaking out of prisons for a living, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I mean, if he was like a cop, maybe a SWAT team sort of guy, or probably a cop or a detective I can buy, but a prosecutor, it's just, On top of that, when it came to some of the mysteries they tried to layer throughout the film, they were kind of sloppy in how they resolved them. And they kind of resolved them in the typical 80s action film sort of sense, where it's just like, oh, let's just blanket all these loose ends over, and we're done. And really, it just was not smooth at all. Really wasn't. It had potential, but it was too 80s for its own good. From a technical standpoint, the film is pretty solid. I mean, it's shot really well, the editing was a little fast in a few places, where it could have slowed down, especially when it's supposed to be scenes where he's looking around and observing everything. That could have been moments where they could have slowed down the editing a little bit to kind of show that he's taking everything in. But I guess they're just like, we just gotta get through the boring parts, which was a bit of a problem because it was moving through some moments way too quickly. Overall, while the film is entertaining, it's not too memorable. It's really only going to appeal to people who are already fans of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. And, well, the story had potential, but I think the biggest hindrance it had was the fact that the whole thing was centered around the fact that, oh, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, they're going to team up. But it's not done in really the fun, cheesy, like, embracing the silliness sort of way that we saw in The Expendables. It was kind of a case where it was trying to be serious, but you could tell that a lot of things were probably changed because the actors that were playing the leads were Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Had we a different set of actors that were probably a little more charismatic and not kind of, well, 80s-ish, washed-out-ish, kind of past their prime, sort of. I don't mean that in the case of, oh yeah, you don't like older actors, but more in the case of, if we had actors that had a little more credibility and could really bring a little more presence to the screen, aside from, oh, it's Sylvester Stallone, oh, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, then the film could have been better. Especially if it knew how to keep its tone even in the third act. If you're into those kind of action movies, you'll enjoy it, but I recommend waiting for it to come to the dollar theaters, that way you can actually afford the popcorn for this popcorn movie. All that said, I give Escape Plan a 3.5 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. Tune in Friday for my review of Carrie. Before anyone asks, no, I'm not going to do a monster clash of old versus new between the two Carrie films yet, because I have to wait until the new Carrie film comes out on DVD, which probably won't be until next year. So don't worry, I will do it next year, once I can actually get a hold of the DVD. But if I were to do it this year and got clips, well, I probably would end up in prison.